There have been a lot of iconic matches in the UFC, but some of those fights were too good to only happen once. So here are the UFC's biggest rival rematches ever. And the first match on our list was the match of the Giants.
All right, this is it. Well, we will have a clean, fair fight. Need to obey my commands.
When Brock Lesnar went head-to-head with Frank Mir, he was a big deal. People either loved him or hated him. His win over interim heavyweight champion Frank Mir was filled with controversy about unfair officiating rulings and a lack of Brazilian jiu-jitsu knowledge. So when the rematch finally happened, both athletes put on an amazing fight.
The big question is,
he's taking some punches here.
Just overpower Mir?
But this time around, the fighter from South Dakota was better prepared for a BJJ match. He consistently countered Mir's submission moves while also employing a few of his own, and eventually pummeled Mir from the half guard with his massive fists. Lesnar won that fight and went on to become the UFC's first true box office sensation. The rematch finally put an end to all questions about unfair rulings. But their initial match wasn't the only one being targeted by bad rumors. Jose Aldo and Chad Mendes went through the same scrutiny.
Jose Aldo the champion. Chad Mendes the challenger. He cannot wait to get this started.
Team Alpha Male member Chad Mendes was aiming to push featherweight champion Jose Aldo to the edge at UFC 142. But Aldo held out, and he did it by giving Mendes a highlight reel-worthy knee. While the clip deserved to be featured in Aldo's Hall of Fame induction video, it also became a highly criticized move. And to say Mendes was angry about it would be an understatement. So by the time their rematch rolled around at UFC 179, he was ready to deliver on the promise made in the first match. The money we saw in the rematch was a fighter ready to risk it all for the win. He hit the Brazilian with everything he had for 5 intense rounds. And for the first time in his reign as the featherweight champion, Aldo was almost outclassed. It's no surprise it's one of the best rival rematches in the UFC. But this rematch still wasn't as intense as the one between Matt Hughes and Frank Trigg, because the welterweight match between these two had a round of old-school mayhem. Trigg scored a knee in the clinch during his second opportunity to win a UFC championship, while Hughes had no idea what hit him. The fighter from New York pounced, put the champion on the ropes, but as he was getting ready to finish the match with a rear naked choke, Hughes pulled himself together. Trigg just couldn't react quickly enough and ended up on the wrong end of a fight-ending choke and another surprising title defense. But Hughes wasn't as lucky in the rematch with his next rival. When Georges St-Pierre and Matt Hughes first met in the ring, the Canadian fighter just wasn't on the same level as his opponent. But when they met in the ring again after 2 years, things were a lot different. Rush proved to all his critics that he only needed a little more experience before starting his rise to the top of the division. He showed he had more to offer than just combat experience based on athleticism and karate, and the fans in Sacramento saw a top-tier mixed martial artist in action. You can even argue that he helped bring about an era of all-rounders in the sport. Not to mention that it also marked a significant change in the division's culture. A new superstar on his way to becoming one of the greatest UFC champions ever after beating one of the best welterweight champions ever. And while this matchup marked the beginning of an era, the next one on our list brought about the end of another. When Quinton Jackson first went up against Chuck Liddell, no one could have predicted the outcome. The two met in a Pride Fighting Championships match, and Jackson defeated Liddell after dominating for 10 minutes straight. So naturally, fans wanted a rematch. And it couldn't have come at a better time for Liddell. The rematch happened when he was on a roll after winning 7 straight fights by knockout or technical knockout. The second matchup took place at UFC 71, and it was a quick affair. Jackson knocked out Liddell with a right punch to the chin, proving why he was the sport's newest superstar. And while we are on the topic of underdogs coming out on top, Davis and Figueiredo's rematch against Brandon Moreno will go down in UFC flyweight history as the triumph of the ultimate underdog. 2 years before this fight happened, Moreno was fighting for the Legacy Fighting Alliance, hoping for a shot at returning to the main event. So when he finally got that chance, he won 3 fights in a row. Fans were excited about the rematch between the Brazilian and Mexican stars since their first match was in the running for the fight of the year. But unlike the first fight, which was a back-and-forth struggle, the second was very one-sided. It was a demonstration of Brandon Moreno's growth as he outwitted and defeated one of the most formidable opponents in division history.
Under the chin! Oh my God, he's got it! He's got it!
He's still fighting. Looks like
He's
it's
He quickly rose to the status of UFC champion and the greatest fighter of Mexican descent in MMA history. But even this rematch can't compare to the one between Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard. Everyone expected a dull fight when these two entered the ring at UFC 125. This was because both of them were famous for never getting clear wins. However, no one could have imagined what occurred on January 1st, 2011. Because of how they battled one another, this was one of the most exciting back-and-forth fights to ever take place inside the octagon. The fight was ruled a draw after a tense 25 minutes, so it was obvious that fans needed a rematch. At UFC 136 in Houston, Texas, the third matchup between the two top lightweight contenders was the main event. It was as thrilling as their first encounter, with Maynard once more taking charge and nearly dispatching Edgar in the first round. The champion, though, returned to settle the score, striking Maynard with a short right hand and putting an end to him with a flurry of lefts. It's only fitting that this fight was called the greatest title fight ever. But I think the fight between Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor was just as exciting. Nobody predicted that Nate Diaz's last-minute replacement fight against Conor McGregor at UFC 196 would lead to the most eagerly awaited rematch in history. But this is exactly what happened, as their rematch in the main event of UFC 202 went on to become the second best-selling pay-per-view in UFC history. Although the outcome was not as clear-cut as the first fight, it was still a chaotic mess. After months of hype build-up with McGregor and Diaz's back-and-forth banter, McGregor's retirement due to media obligations, the fight being called off and rescheduled, Diaz and the notorious McGregor fought all 5 rounds, giving UFC fans an incredibly entertaining fight inside the octagon. In just the first 2 rounds, the Irish boxer bloodied up his opponent as he repeatedly knocked the Californian to the ground. But he was unable to get a knockout. After 3 rounds of exchanging kicks and jabs, McGregor won by majority decision and got his revenge on Diaz. Even in their pre-fight press conference, McGregor acknowledged that Diaz is a good fighter and even admitted he wanted a third match. And fans couldn't agree more. Well, there you have it. These were the UFC's biggest rival rematches ever. See you all in the next video.